This is Late Republic Nonsense, this time with Rick Beato. Hey Rick, how are you?
Hey Dave, very good. How about yourself?
Fantastic. I'm so glad to have you on this episode. It's something that we've been meaning to do for a long time, and I want to thank you for being so supportive of my channel and the Substack and all the different efforts as I try to move towards video. It's slow halting steps, but eventually I think hopefully I'll get there. But I wanted to talk to you for a number of reasons, and there's a lot that we can get into. But first of all, how does it feel? I mean, when I watch your channel, and everybody knows who you are, you're the great music YouTuber, and the person, maybe the person most responsible today on the internet for getting people to appreciate and really fall in love with music. Especially through what makes the song great. I mean, that's where I first found you. It's probably where most people find you.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Your videos, every single video I've ever seen, and I watch all of them when they come out. I get the notification bell, and the one word that comes to mind every single time is gratitude, which is you are so happy to be able to do what you're doing, and you're so happy to be. I mean, it's what a blessing this is, and I know that you feel that way, and it's you don't even have to say you feel that way; it comes across.
I am the luckiest person in the world. Well, Beato in Italian means blessed. So I am. I mean, this is the greatest thing to be able to share my excitement for music with people, and I have pretty diverse taste. I made a video on John Dowland.
I missed that one. He's amazing.
I just put it out a couple hours ago. So
okay, he's amazing. He's one of those guys. Which piece did you talk about?
The Earl of Essex Galliard.
Okay.
And I explained how through the public library in the small town Fairport, New York, that I'm from in upstate New York, I would go to the library and get out classical recordings or jazz recordings or whatever.
Right.
And I got a John Dowland, Julian Bream recording.
Mm-hmm.
Dowland Dances, it was called, or Doland. Some people say the pronunciation is Doland. So, but I always called them John Dowland. And the first piece on the record, it came out in the late 60s. It's the Earl of Essex Galliard. And I told the story of how I used to play this for my son Dylan when he's a baby. A very strange. I mean, my wife thought it was a very strange version with the Julian Bream consort. So playing all period instruments. Mm-hmm. It's about an 8-piece ensemble with a vocalist, and the vocalist is singing in English, but you can't tell it's singing.
Right.
And my wife is what is this music? And I'm holding Dylan. He's a little baby, and I said, "What are you talking about?" And she says, "That's what kind of music is this?" I said, "This is Renaissance music. This is amazing." And I play it for him every night. My wife would just roll her eyes and everything. We were laughing. So tonight I said, I made a video on this piece, and I said, check this out. And Sting, he did a record of his of Dowland's music in 2006. And this piece is one of the pieces he performed. And I played it for my wife, and she started smiling. She goes, "Well, I like this version." So
that's great. He's one of those, Dowland, Henry Purcell, all of these guys that are kind of off the beaten path. I mean, you could say that Dowland was the first. I don't want to put him in the singer-songwriter category, but there's a reason why Sting plays him.
That's right. Yes.
And I was first exposed to him through the ECM records, the Dowland Project. It was John Potter was was a singer, and he brought in English improvisers, Barry Guy, John Sermon, other people, and he sang the straight melody, and these guys improvised around him in a kind of pseudo period, not period at all, but a convincing, really, really beautiful style. And I remember there was they were playing in New York. They came over from the UK, from London, and they were playing one gig, and it was the same night as Stevie Wonder in Madison Square Garden. And I didn't go to either one. It was raining, and like, so this is like something that I take with me for the rest of my life, that I'm gonna die. I miss John Dowland and I miss Stevie Wonder on the same night.
Man, wow.
But anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing that, and like, it's such a blessing. I see, I remember when you did a video on what, Passion Dance from the Real McCoy.
Yes.
And you're sitting there and you're grooving along and you're playing air drums along with Elvin Jones, and it's so great. And I think of all the people. I mean, obviously, all the fun you're having is amazing. And then I think of the people who are, who will go and they'll go on YouTube and search for the original tune, and then they'll be bopping the same way.
Yeah. And the, I was lucky enough to interview Ron Carter, and we talked about him playing with Elvin, but Ron is on that, and Joe Henderson, and I mean, Ron is the only one that's still living from that session, but that is just a phenomenal record. Oh, just so much energy. I mean, I don't understand how rock people don't. I mean, to me, that is as heavy as any rock record can possibly be.
Heavier than most.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, just the intro to Passion Dance, Elvin's fill that he plays, is the room mics are compressing and it sounds amazing.
Yes. No, totally agree. And I mean, it's this. Yeah, it's a brilliant thing, and I just wanted to, like, kind of open by saying thanks, on behalf of me and everyone. I mean, I'll forever associate, your channel with, I mean, one of the great things, bringing Steely Dan to more people, because that's another thing that seems like, every so often it goes in, the tastes change and it goes into eclipse, and then people pick it up again and they really appreciate, what's happening. I mean, the Kid Charlemagne solo, like, really anything, you did a thing on Josie.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that music took a while for me to understand.
Yeah. The thing on Josie, I started that video talking about the intro, but then I thought, well, I need to talk about the riff because it's so cool and so odd. And to think that songs like that got on the radio regularly, well, not like that. That is an unusual song. And Steely Dan's music was really unusual.
Mm-hmm.
But it's astounding to me still that I was lucky enough to grow up during a time when that was on Top 40 radio.
Right. And that actually, that's a good transition into the next topic here, because I saw a clip from Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan's podcast, and it was a short little burst where he's talking about music, and I thought it captured something really interesting, and I want to play it. Let's see, I can actually play it. Can I do that? Oh, look at that.
That deep thing. And then music does something else too. It puts you on the border between chaos and order, because a boring song does exactly what you expect it to do and gets dull very quickly. And an unlistenable song is so random you can't follow it. And so what you want is predictability with a leaven of unpredictability. And then that puts you right on the edge. That's the zone of proximal development, that deep thing. And then music does something else too. It puts you on the
so that I don't know if you heard that, if that actually worked or not.
Yes, it did.
Okay, great. So yeah, it started me thinking about this and about something that I've been obsessed with for like 20 years or more, which is, where is that, he called it the zone of proximal development, where, which is a term in psychology where, wherein, as I have kind of subsequently read, the person, it's like the optimal point for the person to take in and to learn new things, which is the, just a little bit of unfamiliar with something familiar. The person is confident enough to sort of take that leap. They're confident enough to master, a certain amount and then sort of go from there. And that's a kind of good way of capturing what the act of listening to me. I mean, it's a good way of capturing, playing music and how you practice, but it also captures listening to music, which is something that I think we don't talk about enough, which is that what makes something pleasing, what makes something, where is that line between chaos and order for people? And part of the mystery is we don't know where that line is.
Well, that
What
line,
do you think?
well, the line is probably different for different people. When I interviewed Sting, we talked about surprise. That's a term that he likes to use. The surprise notes. If you're a jazz musician, you'd call them color tones or upper extension, or things like that. That Sting just naturally hears in his melody writing. He knows where to put a flat 6 in, or he knows where to put a natural 6 on a minor chord, and get that. He knows what to do with the notes when he uses them. He uses them
in a strategic way. Yeah.
Strategic way. And those surprises are what makes you come back and listen again and again. And when a piece lacks surprise, as Jordan is saying, it gets dull very quickly. Now, as you listen to more and more music, get exposed to more music, not just through listening, on a peripheral level, but really intensely and analyzing, you get, I like to call it kind of an immunity to dissonance in a way, or you start to accept things that would have been really outside the bounds of something tonal, and then it becomes just normal to you. Mm-hmm. And I always wondered why I liked really dissonant music. It wasn't just that my dad listened to Oscar Peterson and Ahmad Jamal and Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Joe Pass. It was that I liked TV shows like Dark Shadows when I was a kid. And when I go back and listen to the music of Dark Shadows, for those of you that aren't 60 or nearly 60 like me, it was a show that was on from 66 to 71. And the music was really, there was a lot of modern classical music was
right.
You heard it every day. And I just love the sound of that. And I didn't realize that it was acclimating me to the sounds of 20th century music, classical music. But when I went back and listened to it later on with my thinking hat on, I thought to myself, wow, it wasn't just listening to jazz. It was watching that show.
That's fascinating. I've never seen the show. Now I'm going to have to go see it.
Yeah. The 60s, the main character, Jonathan Frid, the character was Barnabas Collins. He was a vampire, and it was a horror soap opera that was on 5 days a week. And there's over 1,000 episodes.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So I would come home from school every day and watch it. It was on at 4:00 in the afternoon, a half hour. They filmed a lot of the episodes live, so they'll have mistakes in there and things like that.
Oh my God. Oh, that's amazing.
It was amazing. Yeah. I mean, really, really amazing. And
that's a lot of music for 1,000 episodes worth of films, worth of scoring.
Well, they would have themes that would be associated with characters. There was a witch named Angelique, and she had a particular theme, and there was Josette and Maggie Collins and all these Quentin Collins, all the different characters had their own themes associated with them. Then they had all the incidental music,
right?
That when something was going to happen, they would play a particular theme. Oh wow! But the music was really, really great on it, and I think that was kind of a gateway for me. I think that people will accept much more sophisticated dissonant music if there's a visual that goes with it.
Totally.
If you listen to John Williams, if you were to listen to a John Williams, any of the incidental music, not the big themes in Star Wars, but things that happen in smaller themes that don't have the big fanfares, if you were to listen to it without the visual, it might sound really dissonant to an average person. But once you put the visuals of Indiana Jones falling in with the snakes and you hear the music,
Right. It makes perfect sense.
It makes perfect sense, and people accept it.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think this was actually a big thing for a lot of people who were, kind of your age and older. And, I mean, frankly, even, my age too. This is how they got acclimated to classical music, even more tonal classical music.
yes.
Which is they watch cartoons.
Yeah.
Carl Stalling was, John Zorn always talks about the influence of Carl Stalling, and you can absolutely tell, like, the episodic music,
Yeah.
stop, where it stops and starts on the downbeat, and it's like, it makes perfect logical sense in its little in the cells of music, and then it can make no sense if you add it all up, but like episodically it kind of works. And then, as you said, you put it with an image, and the people accept it.
Yeah, and I think
People
it's
accept it more.
interesting. I've always thought that, and since I become a YouTuber, I realize how important the image is with the music. Okay, and I've thought that I think a lot of people would have gotten into more modern jazz, hard bop, things like that, if there was a visual element to it.
Interesting.
And even if you watch the
So like concert footage, for example.
Yeah. If you watch the TV show that has where they're doing So What, that the black and white image,
right.
solos, and Miles is smoking a cigarette, talking with the other guys in the band, and there's just something about it that when you see the guys perform, there's a different connection with the music. I think you understand it more. So I love that about YouTube, that you can go see all these old performances. And I think that a lot of people, there are performers like Oscar Peterson that a lot of his best work you can see on YouTube now that were not captured. They were captured from live gigs.
Yep.
On TV shows over in Europe at Ronnie Scott's or wherever. And, his records didn't really capture the full scope of what Oscar Peterson was about. So this is why I love, that's another reason I love YouTube, is that you can see anything on there.
It's amazing. Now it's trained, now the algorithm is trained to give me a kind of, to give me my fix of kind of live obscure jazz concert recordings. But like every once in a while it'll just pop, and there's a guy who, I don't know if he's Brazilian or whatever. I think he's South American, and he colorizes old jazz videos.
Wow.
They look great. He's got like 300 of them now. And he takes broadcasts mostly from Europe, where, they cared about such things.
That's right.
And he colorizes them, and most of them, 90% of them look amazing.
Wow. It's cool.
And and it's like, it's a treasure trove. And I never really thought about it that way as a kind of, introduction, because, how did we get into it? We got into it by, putting on vinyl records.
Yeah. And I think that I have to think that there's some type of element that is born within us. My dad was not a musician at all, but he loved jazz, and he loved sophisticated jazz. I mean, he started out, my dad was born in 1919, and he loved big bands, but he really loved bebop, and he loved hard bop. And he worked as a bartender in a place in Rochester called Joe's Squeezers. Even my dad worked for the railroad for 42 years and retired in the 1978 or 79 when I was in high school. But he would work when my parents got married in the late 40s, early 50s. He worked at this place, and all the musicians from New York would pass through there. They do the circuit. Sure. New York, Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, and they go back to New York. So he saw everybody play. And he didn't play anything, but he would whistle the most sophisticated solos.
Sure.
And one of my favorite things to do with him, I'm from a family of 7, but just myself and my younger brother, John, we're the 2 youngest of 7. We both play guitar, and all my siblings are really love to listen to jazz. Mm-hmm. But my dad and myself would sit and listen to an entire record one side of it, flip the record over, listen to the other side, never say a word. He'd sit, twirl his hair, and I'd sit in another chair in our small living room. And that was our thing. And anytime my dad got a new record, we would do that. He wouldn't say anything. He'd like, oh, I just got this. Oh, cool. He'd go sit down, he'd put it on, and I would go sit in a chair and just listen to it. Never say a word, just listen to the whole record.
And did you ever, the next day or something, or afterwards say, hey, Dad, it was an interesting thing that, Joe Pass was doing on the bridge of Stella?
I didn't. He would go and buy records that he thought I should listen to. And because I played the guitar, my dad, would buy me Joe Pass records. He'd buy me Wes Montgomery records, and he would play them. And at first I didn't realize that I could figure the things out. It wasn't until just this one day that my dad had bought me Joe Pass Virtuoso. It came out in 73, but he bought it for me for Christmas. And he's like, if you ever learn to play guitar like this, you've accomplished something with your life. I was like, what? And my dad was a very simple guy, right? Yeah. He was so hip. And I let the record just sit there for a while. And then one day I'm like, I'm gonna try this out. And I would stand in my living room. I talk about this in my John Dowland video. My dad loved to play golf, and he had this little metal cup that he would putt into. And our living room was about 10 by 10.
Right.
I'd sit on the carpet and I practice putting, and I'd listen to jazz or listen to Renaissance music or whatever. And I'm listening to this Joe Pass, and it starts out with Stella's on there around midnight, How High the Moon, and All the Things You Are, Cherokee, and I mean just every standard you need to know is on this one record, Virtuoso, all solo guitar. So All the Things You Are comes on, and I'm listening to it, and I was like, I can figure that out. So I sit down with my guitar, I start figuring it out and everything. And my dad comes home from work about 4 or 5 hours later, and I was like, check this out. And then I started playing along with the record. My dad was just dumbfounded that I could figure it. He said, how did you learn that? I said, I just listened to it. But it was all that developing of my ear over the years and years and years of listening to it. So, and my dad was really into Jobim. That was his favorite composer. He loved Brazilian music, but he loved anything with any Jobim record my dad would buy, or any jazz player that had Jobim covers, Sinatra, whoever it was, he would buy all the Jobim records.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, that it's I think about harmony and melody, really. I mean, the rhythmic thing is harder for people to get a hang of, I think. I mean, if it's not in 4/4, if it's not in 3/4, if it's then people already are starting to feel like they're out at sea,
right?
In many ways, and that's most people. And that's, I guess, to be understood. I mean, not everybody grew up listening to Indian classical music,
right?
Where they have these long cycles of kind of rhythmic cells and things like that. But like the harmony and melody thing is interesting because maybe harmony is the first thing that you kind of, I don't know. I mean, melody is the first thing that you kind of sing. You're a kid, you hear a song and all this stuff, and so weird melodies. I mean, they're weird, but maybe you can kind of get a hang of it. Yeah. And then when you start hearing weird harmonies in songs, there's a limit. I mean, I have this perennial kind of conversation where I troll some of my Twitter followers, who are very kind of aesthetically conservative. And I just, and when they're trying to tell me like what good music is, good music is Bach or it's Beethoven or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But like, it's very hard to go and to put yourself in the time of Bach and Beethoven and to understand what their harmonic frame of reference was. And I mean, Beethoven, as better than anybody, I mean, he was pushing the limits.
That's right.
he was absolutely pushing. I mean, now it seems like old hat, and it's very traditional. You know, in the same way that let's say music of the '60s sounds old hat. You know, maybe to us, because our ears just haven't heard it, and it's, yeah, I mean, it's part of that process, and I go crazy when people think that there is such a thing as like good and bad in these very, you know, hard categories, and you know, the point that you made earlier about like learning how to take in dissonances, so that you recognize them as dissonances, but
and then eventually they don't sound dissonant to you.
Right.
You get this immunity to it, to a certain, at first it just might be +4. Oh, what is that? And then after a while it's like, oh, that sounds normal. You don't even need to resolve it, you know? And then it might be a flat 9 in a chord or something. And then it might be a sharp 5 and a flat 9.
Right.
Then it might be a triad that's a tritone away. And it'd be, you know, and then all of a sudden that just becomes, I call it a vocabulary of recognized sound. Is kind of the term that I use for that you need to, if you want to be really develop your ear, you have to develop this vocabulary of recognized sounds where it's just instinctual. Oh, I know that's a 13 flat 9 chord, or that's, you know, a major 7 sharp 5, something like that. These are more sophisticated chords that jazz players use. And then eventually you start to run out of those things, and then it gets into even more sophisticated music that
you do microtonal music.
And you do microtonal
right.
music. But very few people are open to new styles of music, and it's hard. People get locked into what they liked when they were teenagers, pretty much, or into their early 20s, usually through college or whatever. And then your growth is kind of stunted at that point, and it's really hard to stay open to new music. And when I do these interviews of people that I've done, I have an interview coming up this weekend with Al Di Meola. I'm going to tomorrow to interview Al over the weekend. And I went and revisited all the Return to Forever records, Al's solo records, and his play. I mean, Al has a lot of solo records that he's done since the 70s. Al's 67 years old. So when I'm preparing for an interview, going back and revisiting things that you haven't heard in
forever, Return to Forever.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah. And then I listened to the, you know, Friday Night in San Francisco with Paco de Lucia and John McLaughlin, and then Elegant Gypsy and all his, you know, all the early solo records at the time. And I Land of the Midnight Sun, his first solo record, I forgot Jocko was on that. And Jocko was on that in 1975, even before he was on Bright Size Life.
Really? Yeah. I didn't know that. I haven't heard that record ever.
He's only on one track. He's on track 5. And Jocko was first actually on Paul Bley, a record in 74 with Paul Bley. And then he was on Al's record. Then he was on Bright Size Life. But really, Pat is the reason that people know Jocko, because he played with him down in Fort Lauderdale, or when Pat was teaching at the University of Miami in whatever it was, 72, I think it was, something like that. And then he went up to Berkeley in 73. Pat taught there.
Right.
And Al was at Berkeley. I don't know if the times, I think Al was at Berkeley in 71, 72, something like that. So, but it's really interesting though, that how those players were all connected. And this, I realized that in listening to those Return to Forever records, when Al was in the band, it was really progressive rock. It wasn't jazz like the early Return to Forever with Joe Farrell. They really became a progressive rock band, and with just different vocabulary harmonically, and it's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that music in so long. You go back, listen to it with my ears now being 60 years old and 50 more years of listening, and I have just a completely different impression of it. It's really, really fascinating.
Interesting. I wonder how much that sound was influenced by Chick's Scientology.
I don't know. I don't know.
because there was I don't know the story. I mean, I'm sure you heard the story about him. I mean, he was playing, avant-garde music with Anthony Braxton and, and these guys. And then one day he just decided to do Return to Forever and go, because he felt like, I guess his religious impulse told him to go in a more kind of accessible pop direction.
Well, I think that the bands that were big at the time, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, the Genesis, yes, those bands were massively big. And I think that some of the jazz musicians, I want to say, I'm not sure about this. I'll ask Al, but I think they may have toured with some of those progressive rock bands. I don't know if
that makes sense. I would believe it.
I think that they may have toured with them and they were influenced by that. These people, that would
influenced by the size of the crowds.
The size of the crowds, yeah.
And then also, also by the music. I mean, that stuff was great.
Yeah. So so Al will be able to tell me that, actually.
Right. The Genesis story. Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. So it's funny that you mentioned the music schools, which is a good segue too. So to a point that like I keep thinking about, or I've thought about for a long time, which is that, I mean, I am not a music school guy. I am a combination of self-taught and, study with, an apprenticeship guy.
Yeah.
And I show up in New York in the late 90s to play, jazz in like the avant-garde downtown settings. And it was great. I played with all my heroes. It was, it was a wonderful experience and one that I'll treasure. But it was funny to the extent to which my peers were all music school people. And that was interesting because they had so much experience. They listened to so much stuff and they had big ears and they were open to the, especially to the harmonic differences or the let's say open to harmonic difference in things. And they had big ears and it was great. But I noticed at the same time that, while all my friends went to music school, none of the people in the audience went to music school.
Right.
Right. None of the people out there went to music school. And I thought, man, we do such a great job of teaching musicians how to listen. But the average person doesn't know how to listen. The average person is like, I mean, and I think this explains, to some extent, it explains pop music today, or like the crap that exists today, which is that people don't know the difference between good and bad. They're not taught how to listen to music, how to process, how to say, you know what, I'm actually looking for something with a little more meat on the bone.
Well, I think that one of the issues is that kids are so addicted to video games that music doesn't occupy, even pop music doesn't occupy the same space that it did when we were growing up. Once again, the visual that's associated with it, video games are so addicting that it doesn't even leave room to listen to music in the background. Or, kids will get on Discord servers with their friends and they wear headphones with a little headset and things like that. And they all talk to their group of friends while they're playing video games. So there's really no room for music.
There's no room. Wow.
There's no music there's music in some of the video games and things, but they don't have the same experience of listening to music while you're doing something that's not related to that. Or if you're just listening to music in your room, looking at an album, which is what, we would do.
Sure.
And just kind of being there with your thoughts on what's going on in the music and using your imagination. So that's a problem today, I think, and why people just don't even care if every voice is auto-tuned. People are like, oh, AI will never take over anything. I was like, are you kidding me?
It already has.
It already has.
Yeah.
I mean, you start computerizing voices, and I'm always rant about auto-tune, things like that. Yeah, keep auto-tuning things. Then all of a sudden, people will just pick out every word from your songs, and then they'll put you on a keyboard, and then they'll play the songs. They won't even need the artist.
Right.
Things are so auto-tuned, it doesn't even sound like a human being anyways, right? So you remove all the nuance and humanity from it. And what do you need this actual real singer for if all the work's being done by the DAW, you know? So
Right.
But
I never thought about this, about the video game aspect.
yes, it's really insidious. It robs kids of their interest in I think it really robs kids of their imagination, because it is so all income. It's not like watching TV.
Sure.
It's because of the fast reactions and the way that they play the games, and the games are just,
you have to be totally immersed.
You have to be totally immersed. Yeah. And now they'll have the Oculus on or whatever,
Oh my God.
play those things. Then you're really totally immersed.
Sure.
And you're swiping with lightsabers while the music's going on and it's playing whatever's getting licensed for the things.
Yeah, I mean, look,
it's whatever.
This is actually an idea for a piece, or maybe a video. Like, will there be music in the metaverse?
Right.
Does there need to be?
It's
an open question.
It's an open question.
I mean, if it is, I think one of the things that I keep coming back to is sort of, we're like the last of the analog generation, which means we approach digital things as if they have some kind of a relation to the real world.
Right.
And for people, I mean, I'm sure, like, for your kids who grew up in it, that link doesn't necessarily have to exist.
Right.
And I think that's a fundamental break and a fundamental, shift in what it means to be human, what it means to do all these things. And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, the answer is, like, I'm just kind of scared shitless for when we disappear.
Well, when I was growing up, three of my four grandparents were born in the 1800s.
Wow.
Right? I mean, that's
right.
Really, I mean, my dad's parents, 1891, 1896. My grandparents on my dad's side were born in the 1800s. My mom's dad was 1899 and her mom was 1905. I have an aunt that passed away last year. My mom's aunt, one of my mom's aunts passed away. My mom passed away in 2016, but my Aunt Marge passed away, and her dad, my mom's grandfather, one of my mom's grandfathers, he was born in 1864, and she was alive till 2020. Okay. When Abraham Lincoln was still president.
Yes.
I mean, he was in Palermo, Sicily, but
still, it was, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a different world.
It's, I mean,
if the 70s and 80s were a different world,
yeah,
that was really a different world.
Yeah. And her parents died. Both of her parents died in 1935. My Aunt Marge, she went from 1935 to 2020. Her parents died, right after the Depression. I mean,
sure.
And it's to have lived that long. I mean, it's really incredible to see that. So my values and my were informed by people that were born in the early part of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. And I'm 2 generations older than my kids. Sure. My youngest is almost 9, and so my kids are 14, 12, and 9. And and the music that I was exposed to, I did a talk at my son's school, not for his grade, but for 7th graders. This was last week. And his teacher had me come in, his homeroom teacher come in and talk about the Beatles.
Huh, okay.
And I was thinking about it when I was preparing for the class, and my lifespan, I was born in 62, really when the Beatles first came out with Love Me Do. In October, they came out, and I was born in April. So my life is spanned from the Beatles on till 2022 now. And most of rock and roll, obviously I didn't hear 50s rock and roll,
sure,
but I heard it when I was a kid. So, but my kids were born after YouTube started. They were born the iPad, the iPhones, everything, computers, everybody had computers, and it's in every video of them as babies. There were laptops,
Sure.
things like that. It just, they don't know any other world other than that. And the ease of listening to music, Dave, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Sting talked about this, that it's like just water out of a tap. You can just at any time, any music that you want. And I can't remember if he was talking about it where it's somehow loses its value because of that, because it's so easy to get an album. You have to go to the store. You have to buy it, you have to take it off, you have to check it to make sure it's not warped when you get it. Otherwise you're going to bring it back. You look at it, you flip it over. Does it look good? Okay, let's put it down. Let's see what it sounds like. And then you physically, depending on what kind of turntable you had back then, there's all the physical elements of it. And then it's actually floating in a groove and producing sound.
I mean, I'm sure you remember as a kid learning what the turntable was and how to use it and how you take, and maybe your dad showed you, you take the needle, the stuff, you put it on the groove and you hold it from both ends. You don't grab the sides. Yeah. And
he would freak out when first.
Sure. Oh my God. And you'd run into it or something like that. And it's just, you jump up and down and the thing would skip.
Yeah.
And, but yet we were like, whatever, 5-7 years old and like changing the records, because that's what, these days, would you give, they don't even know what that is.
Right.
I remember I had the damn, I had the picture disc of Mary Poppins.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Mary Poppins on one side, and on the other side, there were both Julie Andrews, Mary Poppins, and it was one with the supercalifragilistic, and then the other side was with what's his name, with Dick Van Dyke in the chimney sweep,
right,
kind of segment, and you used to stare at that.
Yeah.
And look at it and just like my going through my parents' old records when I was a kid, like the first moment that I learned you can play these things, I was like, okay, what do you have? Just
or put on a record and it's like, that sounds weird, and it's on 45, and you put on an LP. What's wrong with the record? And then it's on 45. Change it back. Take the needle off, turn it,
Right. Yeah. The whole thing. So it's like, okay, so with your kids, what are you doing to sort of keep them grounded, to have some, like, to keep them kind of tethered to real analog life? If anything.
It's tough. I listen to music when I drive to school with my kids every day. And I will typically listen to jazz. I'll drive my daughters to school, and I always ask them, what kind of music is this? And I might play something like Alan Holdsworth. And I was like, what kind of music is this? Well, they'll know now. Oh, it's Alan Holdsworth. But what kind of music is this? Well, it's kind of rock, but it's kind of jazz. And like, yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I was we were listening to El Di Meola this past week, and my 8-year-old Layla, she's like, wow, he's really clean.
Oh man, he must have loved that.
Yeah. I was like, he is really clean.
Right.
He never plays a bad note,
Yeah. Not Jimmy Page.
No. We love Jimmy though.
Oh, of course.
He's the best. But Al is just so, everything's so precise, and Layla immediately perceived that,
It's amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
But that's the way, that's the way that you have a captive audience there. We're going to listen to music. I'm the dad. I play what I want in the car, and you guys listen to whatever you want when you're home. So, and do your own, listen to your own music.
Well, just that kind of time of dedicated listening is almost revolutionary because, as you said, there's so many things that are impinging or encroaching on that, that time that, it is a revolutionary act to tell your kids, like, no, we listen now.
That's right.
Or just to have that because when you say we listen now, what does it mean? I mean, it means that this is something that is worth doing. It's something that's worth concentrating on. It's something that's worth, it's something that's worth your attention. Which is
my kids accept it too, that I like to listen to music, and I was playing John Dowland music for them, and they loved it. They had never, other than my son Dylan hearing it when he was a baby. My wife, yesterday, I was thinking about this. The song came back into my mind, the Earl of Essex, and I start playing that. And my wife, I say in the video, my wife's like, "Oh my God, not again!" It was 14 years ago, and she's like, "Not again." I was like, "Yep, I'm making a video on this."
That's great.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's amazing. All right, what's the next frontier? What's the next thing that you've heard that you want to get into but you haven't yet?
I'm really actively studying people that I'm trying to get to interview that are going back and going over old catalogs of people that I don't want to say, but famous,
Sure,
musicians that are in their 70s and 80s that I want to interview while they're still here.
Right. And you're doing such a service by kind of memorializing their experience.
I'm trying, and it takes a lot of preparation. When you interview Ron Carter, and Ron's got 2,200 records he played on, but he's got a phenomenal memory.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
So
that interview was fantastic. And like the best part about it, which I had mentioned to you, is, opening with the scene in New York, typical Saturday. What does it look like?
Yeah.
Typical Saturday, 1961. What does that look like when you could really hear this music in, I don't know, 100 different rooms.
Yeah.
In New York.
His answer was amazing. You did 4 sets, and each set would be different. You play your more sophisticated forms in the first set. The last set would be more blues forms and things. It was like, wow. And I'm just fast. I just can picture it,
Right. I mean, look, the dude remembers like a random drummer he played with in like 1960. Once.
Right. I mean, really. But of course, these, when so many standards like Ron does, and you're constantly thinking, you have lead sheets in your head, and you're listening, and this is pretty sophisticated stuff when you're the bass player in a jazz group. I always would say about, people talk about Ornette, and I'd say, man, Ornette never played his music was not outside at all, because Charlie Hayden played the right bass note under every melody he played.
Right.
Charlie's ear was so developed that everything sounded so melodic, because it was, so that ability to listen. And Ron said in the interview, I asked him about Maiden Voyage and about Speak No Evil, those records, and talking about the harmony. He was like, well, the harmony was after I played the bass notes under those chords.
then they made sense. Right.
Exactly. I was like, yeah, that's true. So
yeah, I mean, look, he's the one guy. I got that from the interview too. Like he understands his responsibility, in the music, and Charlie did as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, Charlie's the guy who made me want to play the bass, and I was lucky to have met him a bunch of times before he passed. And interestingly enough, I had just moved to Texas, and I'm like, you know what? There's no Charlie Hayden on YouTube. So I went and I found a clip, and I knew he wasn't doing too well health-wise. And I found a clip, and I just put it up, and it was from a longer video. It's just he's playing Lonely Woman in solo. And I put that up, and a week later he passes. And I was like, man, what possessed me to put this up? Because in every obituary, in everything, like it was that video. And I was so happy that there was something beautiful and representative. I actually watched it last night at the gym. You know, I don't know why. I was like, I just need to hear this now. And you know, so like that's another reason why, you know, I mean, we can shit on you know, kind of, you know, modern times a lot, and it's worth it. But like, you know, as you say, like YouTube, it's just,
oh my God,
having that archive is amazing. And it depends on you, right? Like it depends on the like the person, the individual, the listener himself is responsible for looking for it, because if you look it up, it's there.
It's there.
Yeah.
My dad passed in 2004, and he would have loved YouTube. Oh
man, for
he
sure.
would have spent all day watching performances on there. He would not have believed the performances that were captured. I you know, I think of him every time when I'm going through you know, you can just go through these things where you watch concert after concert. And
yes,
I always think of my dad, you know, I just imagine us sitting in front of a TV watching it instead of just listening to the record.
Sure.
And he would have been mesmerized that all these things are available that you can watch anytime for free, you know?
Yep.
It's incredible.
Usually at 3 o'clock in the morning or something, when you should be sleeping, and you're going from one to the next, and you're like, oh man, I didn't know this. And these rabbit holes that used to require trips to the library.
Yes.
And like, I mean, we used to get in the car. We used to go, like, you know, I lived, you know, grew up in Jersey. We used to drive half the state, you know, down to Princeton, you know, Record Exchange and places like that. Like, oh, I heard there was a record store that sold, you know, these bootlegs. And, you know, I mean, it was really a pain in the ass, but you had to want it. And in the same way now, you know, you have to look. You got
to search. You got to search. It's I went backstage and I talked to Pat Metheny the other night. He played here in Atlanta, and you know, we were talking about YouTube, and he said about the interview that I did with him, and he, you know, he didn't know, he doesn't watch YouTube very much, and I think he thought that the interview would get about 5,000 views. It's got 1.5 million views. And I said, Pat, there's a lot of people that are interested in hearing what you have to say about all the music that you've played in your life. And that's a lot of records. I mean, he's been making records since 1974 with Gary Burton, you know, pre Brightside Life.
Right.
And there's a lot of experiences to recount for him, and he's only 67 years old, you know. I didn't get to meet Charlie Hayden. I mean, I saw Charlie Hayden play in the 80s. Was the last time I saw him. I actually was at the Village Vanguard with Pat and Billy Higgins in
1986.
1984. I saw it.
Oh, okay.
And I have a bootleg, and Pat told me that and I didn't get this in the interview. This was in the lounge before or after the interview. He said that a lot of the best things that they did were from live gigs. And I said, you know, I have a bootleg from 1984. I need to get it to him. And I fixed it up where you can really hear the bass. It was done with I recorded it with a Walkman. And
bootleg that you made.
That I made, yeah.
Oh man, that's amazing.
Like May 4th, 1984.
Wow.
And I was sitting right in front of Pat with two of my friends from Ithaca from college.
Mm-hmm.
And we heard that he was playing, and I said to my buddy Tom, I was like, you know, Pat's playing down at Village Vanguard tonight. And he's like, let's go. It's 4 hours from Ithaca to New York. I was like, are you serious? Like, yeah, we'll go get tickets. Well, let's leave right now. So we skipped our classes and went. Perfect. And yeah, so it was, you know, it was great. We got there and they were setting up, and we went and got our tickets and stuff. But that's the last time that I saw Charlie. You know, but whoever's, you know, still here, you know, I mean, since my channel started, we lost Chick. We lost, I mean, there's, you know, so many people, Alan Holdsworth, and, you know, you're losing people every day now. It's, and with that, you lose the history. I mean, to ask Ron Carter, what's the difference between playing with Elvin Jones and Tony Williams? How many people can answer that question?
Sure.
Right. So,
and as the bass player,
as a bass player, and then about McCoy and Herbie,
right?
Difference. And
yes,
I don't know why I thought of those questions. I didn't.
They were perfect questions.
Yeah, I just was.
Yeah. But it's the question. It's the question that every jazz freak wants to know.
Right.
You know, which
for you?
yeah. You know, which is great, because at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of these guys are kind of sick of doing bullshit interviews, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of why they like talking to you, because, you know, I mean, you know, you go on tour to promote a record, you know, you go on media tour, you say the same thing. They ask you the same questions. You know, what did you think about this album? Well, you know, it was a very personal, blah, 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 blah. It was great to play with these guys. Right. You know, and so to be in a situation where you're asking them about their catalog, their history, is huge. And because they never get to talk about it. And you can see what that means, you know, to these people. And you know, I mean, Pat Metheny, Ron Carter, these guys know their place in the history.
Mm-hmm.
And they also know that it's really good to have some of this stuff memorialized, because,
yes,
you know, because they are, you know, and they're kind of giants of this music.
Yeah. And one of the things that I love about YouTube is that if you have an internet connection, it's free and anybody can watch it anytime. And that's one of the reasons that I got on and started making videos, is because it was my I used to say this at the beginning of my channel. I did so many horrible records with such bad music in the past. I'm trying to repay. You know, this is my repayment to try and do something good with music instead of. I've worked as a producer. I worked with some good artists and everything, but I also did some really bad records and things like that with people that should never have been recording.
Everybody makes some clunkers.
Yeah, and so I'm doing my best to kind of you know, make up for that. So give away all the things I've been fortunate enough to have learned to the world, and you know, whatever I can do
right
between now and when I stop, you know, I'll keep going.
It's amazing. It's amazing and inspiring. I got one last question for you.
Yes.
What is creativity?
Just the ability to be open to ideas, and creativity. It's
a hard one.
It's a hard one.
It's a really, it's
a hard one.
You know,
open. I just think openness to ideas.
Sure.
That's what, you know, I think that creative people are open to new ways of thinking and new and always, you know, okay, if this, you know, if that works here, then what about this? And working out their ideas through their art, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about why I enjoy music, if I didn't ever have to do anything again, I would still practice my guitar or just play, because I just like to play things I like the sound of and try and come up with new things. And that's the most important thing to me, is to be creative, write things, or improvise. And really improvisation is kind of the pinnacle of that to me, is just in the moment, coming up with ideas and
making an infinite number of decisions at every moment.
Yeah.
You know, because that's like, if you really think about it, that's what you're doing. You know, you're letting your mind take over, but it's really an infinite number of decisions.
Yeah.
And, you know, I feel like you can teach improvisation. You can teach, you know, you can almost teach creativity, but you can't teach curiosity.
No. And that's the thing that I find, that people that lack curiosity are typically not creative people. I mean, they kind of go hand in hand. Creativity. When I make videos, I improvise them. I don't write a script. I'm not a writer. I'm always amazed at people that can write. When I read, if you're writing about music, I just think like, God, Dave writes about music. I can't even think. How does he think like that? And when I do it, I speak about music and use examples and when I'm talking about John Dowland, I mean, I think, okay, what do people really need to know about this? Well, if I talk about Renaissance music, what does the Renaissance era mean? Well, it's like you have the early Renaissance, 1400 to 1470, then mid-Renaissance is like 1470 to 1530, then the late period would be 1530 to 1600, Then it's like, okay, they need to know that. Do they need to know Josquin Desprez? Do they need to know, what's important to the video? Then you have to make these decisions I make those decisions on the fly as I'm improvising the content. What is the important elements that you make, but also make it interesting to watch? You have to have a narrative, and the narrative is my wife. The funny part is always trying to find that thing,
What's the hook?
What is that?
Yeah.
What are you playing? And I just love that. It cracks me up to think of her saying that. And then last night, oh no, not again.
That's one of my favorite things. There's a little John Zorn clip that I found where he was kind of talking about that, like, what is this music? And man, I think of that all the time. And people, I'll be playing music in the house or in the car or something. And how many times in my life have I heard, what is this music?
That's all I hear.
And every time it's great.
Music.
Right. And like, rolling her eyes and, doing the
when they
thing.
don't say anything, Dave, that's actually bad. Then it's really not interesting.
Right. It's not provocative enough.
That's right.
Yep.
So I like to get a reaction like that. I'm thinking, oh, okay.
Okay. Right. Making trouble.
Right.
All right, man. Thank you so much. This has been great. Thank you. And thank you for everything you do. And thank you for your friendship.
You too.